At my own wedding, I never imagined that I would be the one to reveal family conflict. But here we are. To be honest, this whole thing wasn't even my fault in the first place, and I'm on page 29. At Leanne's housewarming celebration, I got to be no Reed. He appeared to prefer being somewhere else as he stood at the snack table by himself, which somehow added to his allure. I'm always drawn to those quiet, enigmatic personalities. His dry humor and the fact that he genuinely listened to me when I spoke struck a chord with me as soon as we started conversing. I got his number after 2 vodka sodas, and I was starting to get a little obsessed. From the start, dating Reed felt different. He was reserved, but in a sincere way, unlike men who pretend to be secretive to be intriguing. After 3 dates, he finally revealed the reason behind his previous marriage. During dinner, he told me while looking into his glass as if he were trying to find something. It did not end well. I felt sick to my stomach when he said it. It turns out that his older brother Blake had an affair with his ex-wife Chelsea. What might your husband's brother look like? The ultimate act of treachery. When he returned home early from a business trip and discovered them in his bed together, Reed learned, I felt ill from the mental image, but the way his family responded to it really got to me. It seems that his parents, Diane and Warren, encouraged everyone to be silent in order to maintain family harmony. Since Blake was going through a difficult period at the time, they even anticipated that Reed would move on from it swiftly, as if it were a justification for having sex with your brother's wife. I was thinking that his folks must be really insane between us. Reed claimed that his interactions with Blake had dwindled to chilly civility at required family gatherings. However, his parents were always attempting to impose reconciliation. He tried to pretend it was history, but I could tell it still affected him terribly. I would occasionally see his jaw tense up before he put his phone down without answering. A text from his mother. Or he would receive this aloof face when family calls came in. But being the person he trusted enough to try again with, the one assisting in his recovery, made me feel unique. You brought him back to life, his friend. Garrett told me once after Reed left at a pub, referring to how much happier he appeared to be since we met. I became increasingly aware of Reed's parents' disparate treatment of Blake as our conversation became more serious. It was eye-opening to spend Christmas at their place. Reed received a sweatshirt, while Blake received pricey golf clubs. While Reed was not questioned about his new promotion, Blake's stories dominated dinner talk. I tried not to push too hard on family matters, but Reed shrugged when I brought it up later, saying, "It's always been that way." The favoritism was so blatant that it made me uneasy. Reed was obviously still taking it all in. After a year and a half, I was overjoyed when he proposed. The Blake crisis erupted once more when we began organizing our wedding. Blake wasn't welcome at our wedding, Reed stated firmly. I was all for him. When you start a new marriage, why would you want the man who ruined yours to be there? Warren and Diane, however, went insane. The guilt trip began right away. When Blake goes, what will everyone think? The family will discuss it for years to come. You're clinging to the past and acting like a child. I saw Reed become exhausted and irate after these calls. First, I tried mediating. I once proposed that we sit him far away from us in order to put an end to the daily fights. Reed gave me the look he thought I had proposed to invite serial killers to the wedding. He is not arriving. The conversation is over. Even when Reed's mother called me directly to try to reason with him, I remained steadfastly on his side after that. I wanted to yell when she added, Blake made a mistake, but he's family. Having an affair with your brother's wife is more than just an error. Rather, I gently informed her that although we valued her viewpoint, the guest list was final. Seeing our wedding preparations totally eclipsed by this drama was the hardest part. 3 calls from Warren stopped our cake sampling. As if every wedding talk somehow reverted to this problem rather than concentrating on our happiness, Reed was preoccupied the entire time during our location tour after receiving an email from Blake saying he only wanted to help his brother on his wonderful day. As Reed became increasingly reclusive, I began to question whether we would ever be able to get past the shadow of his history. I had no idea that the true drama had not yet begun. The Blake issue worsened as our wedding date drew nearer. Diane brought it up again while Reed and I were having supper with his folks. "Everyone is inquiring as to whether Blake will be present," she remarked while tagging her food. I felt Reed stiffen as I grabbed his knee beneath the table and said, Cousin Heather specifically asked. "Mom, stop," Reed gritted his teeth and muttered. Warren interrupted with that phony, rational tone that makes me want to hurl things. "We've been over this 100 times. I saw Reed's expression change, from irritated to enraged as he said, "Son, it's been 3 years. At some point, you have to move forward as a family." "Move forward?" "He slept with my wife in our bed," was undoubtedly heard by those seated at adjacent tables. As soon as I realized that Diane's entire worry was about appearances, she went into damage control mode and gave the older couple next to us an awkward smile while muttering, "Lower your voice." Reed's feelings were completely irrelevant to them. All they wanted was to appear to their Facebook followers and country club mates like the ideal family. Before Reed hit the steering wheel at a red light, the automobile journey home was quiet. He added, "They've always taken his side," with a little break in his voice. My heart hurt for him. Even when we were kids and he broke my stuff or lied about me, always Blake first. I proposed that we temporarily put his family and wedding preparations on hold, simply to take a breath. Reed concurred, but the harm had already been done. His past was taking center stage during our wedding, which ought to have been about our love and future. It was a great week free of family drama. We got takeout, binge-watched television, and recollected the original reason for our marriage. However, when Diane included Blake in a group chat regarding the plans of the rehearsal dinner, reality set in. I heard her high-pitched voice on the phone when Reed contacted her right away. Reed hung off in the middle of his statement and tossed his phone on the couch, saying, "He's your brother. What are people going to think when your only sibling isn't at your wedding?" He said, "This is never going to end," with a despondent expression that I had never seen in him. The following day, I attempted to reason with Diane myself. A huge error. She asked me to lunch, but it ended up being an ambush with Warren as well. She reached for my hand and murmured, "Paige, sweetie," which I opportunely shifted to get my water. Instead of discounting his son's entirely legitimate emotions, Warren nodded wisely, saying, "You seem like such a positive influence on Reed. Maybe you could help him see that holding grudges only hurts himself." Warren's face clouded as I added, trying to maintain a calm tone, "With all due respect, Reed isn't holding a grudge. He was betrayed by the two people he should have been able to trust most after you two." I was shocked to hear, "Blake made a mistake. He's apologized repeatedly." I yelled, "A mistake is not sleeping with your brother's wife or forgetting to return a borrowed book." Diane's eyes grew wide as if I had proposed serving hot dogs at the wedding rather than their priceless fish. 3 weeks prior to the wedding, the last straw was reached. To make sure Blake would attend the bachelor celebration his buddies were hosting, Reed's cousin Tara gave him a call. Reed questioned, "Who told you Blake was invited?" As it happened, Diane had been informing the whole family that Reed and Blake had made up and that everything was okay again. She was deliberately deceiving everyone. She sobbed when questioned about how awkward it was to explain the circumstances, and how all she wanted was for her family to be complete again. Reed was so furious that he was unable to talk. I was racing after him when he simply left their house. Reed was simply staring at the ceiling that night when I decided what to do. This was not Blake's wedding. It was ours, not the social gathering of Diane and Warren. Ours. I informed Reed that Blake's photo should be given to the venue's double security. I vowed, "He's not getting in." I knew I had spoken the right thing when Reed looked at me with such love and relief. And if your parents can't respect that, maybe they shouldn't come either. I had no idea how quickly things would get out of hand. Everything was in disarray the week before our wedding. Reed's parents were constantly calling, alternating between angry and guilt-ridden calls. Warren yelled, "After all we've done for you," during one call. Reed reminded them, "We're paying for half this wedding." He was informed that we had clearly promised to cover all costs ourselves in order to prevent this kind of deception, but they had persisted. It's a classic control strategy, in my opinion. In the meantime, I was still attempting to pick up my dress and settle the seating charts while controlling Reed's mounting nervousness about the whole thing. We had our rehearsal dinner 2 days prior to the wedding. Diane and Warren, who appeared uncomfortable but behaved appropriately, arrived late. All night long, Blake was not mentioned. In fact, I began to hope that they had finally come to terms with the situation. We ought to have been more aware. I heard Diane talking on the phone as we were heading out. "Yes, everything's set for Saturday. Reed will come around once he sees you there." My blood began to boil. She still intended to sneak Blake in. Reed addressed his parents in the parking lot after I told him right away. They said, "We're just trying to help you heal." Ambush him with his trauma on his wedding day to aid in his recovery? That's mother-in-law of the year material. Reed hardly slept the night before our wedding. At 3 a.m, I saw him looking through old texts on his phone. I said, "Are you okay?" My stomach fell when he handed me a message from Blake. That read, "Looking forward to celebrating with you tomorrow, brother." They were still plotting their ambush in spite of everything. Reed gave me such a dejected expression. I kept him until dawn, wondering if our wedding day would turn out to be a total disaster. I thought I moved past all this. I really did, but they won't let me. I didn't realize how correct I was. The weather was ideal on the morning of our wedding, but I was filled with a deep sense of dread. My bridesmaid Jenna told me she saw Warren having a heated discussion with the wedding coordinator while I was getting my hair done. I texted Reed right away while he and his friends were getting ready across the venue. "Watch out for Blake," I cautioned. "I think they're still planning something." Our ceremony was supposed to take place at 4 p.m. My maid of honor, Zoe, rushed into the room around 3:30 as I was getting dressed. "Blake's here," she exclaimed, panting. Security stopped him at the entrance, but he's arguing that his parents said he could come. I was feeling unwell. They were unable to honor Reed's desires, even on the day of our wedding. While I phoned security myself to reiterate that Blake was not allowed entry under any circumstances, I dispatched Zoe to find Reed. Even though my heart was pounding, the ceremony itself was lovely. For an instant, all else vanished as I walked down the aisle to Reed and saw the joy on his face. Diane was clearly that Blake wasn't in the family photos, but we nevertheless exchanged vows, kissed as husband and wife, and got through it. During cocktail hour, I became a little more relaxed. Perhaps we were spared the bullet. The reception followed. The celebration was finally getting into its groove after we made our debut and performed our first dance when I saw Reed tensing, up next to me. I followed his eyes and noticed Blake standing close to the door. His shoulders had Reed's arm over them. They had managed to get him past security somehow. Whispering, Reed squeezed my hand. "I need to handle this." He got to his feet. As he approached, I saw him point to the exit and say something to Blake. In fact, when Diane put herself between Blake and made a dramatic gesture, Blake appeared to be about to leave. I can still see what occurred next in slow motion. Reed left them, but he made a beeline for the DJ rather than coming back to our table. He held the microphone in his palm, and the music ceased before I could comprehend what was occurring. There was silence in the room. Reed began, "I want to thank everyone for coming today," in a firm voice. Many of you might be wondering why my brother Blake isn't part of the wedding party today. My pulse halted. Was this what he was doing? The crowd fell silent as the speaker said, "The reason is simple. I didn't invite him because I was worried he'd steal my wife, just like he stole my last one." No one was laughing, but Reed stated it with a smirk, almost as a joke. I witnessed Warren's face turning scarlet, Diane's hand flying to her lips, and Blake simply standing motionless close to the door. Then, like wildfire, the murmuring began to spread throughout the tables. I'm not sure what I anticipated feeling. Feeling embarrassed? Perhaps anger? Instead, I felt a strange mixture of pride and dread as I watched Reed finally confront his family's deceit. Almost dragging Blake along, Diane and Warren bounded out. After returning the microphone to the astonished DJ, Reed appeared lighter, in some way, as if he had dropped a huge load. Taking my hand, he said, "I apologize if that made you feel embarrassed. But I'm not sorry I said it." Eventually, the group got back together. Although alcohol helped, the harm had already been done. Reed's cousins went early, and half of the attendees were unable to look us in the eye. Later that evening, Reed's phone rang with messages as he showered in our hotel room. More kept pouring in, accusing Reed of being harsh and pitiful, saying Blake had apologized numerous times, and that Reed was ruining his life by exposing him. "Diane, how could you humiliate your brother like that?" "Warren, we raised you better than this." Not a single message honored Reed's limits or acknowledged his pain. Before Reed could see them, I erased them all. It was the night of our wedding. At least that much peace was due to him. I assured Reed they'll get over it when he brought up his parents' absence during the sparkler send-off. He nodded, but I could see uncertainty in his eyes as he said, "They just need time to realize they pushed you too far." Neither of us understood at the time that this public disclosure would cause a series of events that would ultimately expose relational flaws in our own relationship, flaws I was unaware existed. Isn't the first week of marriage supposed to be blissful? That's what every film depicts. Family drama overwhelmed them for us. Reed's parents stopped making angry calls every day and became silent, which, to be honest, the whole family picked a side. Most unexpectedly, after they found out, they sided with Reed. However, several important connections were strained. Reed should have handled it in secret, according to his beloved aunt, who had essentially reared him throughout the summers. The wound was reopened with every fresh opinion. I truly did try to be encouraging. However, I was worn out after a month of every conversation returning to the wedding gate, as I had begun to refer to it in my mind. "Is there anything else we can discuss tonight?" I proposed over dinner. "Anything else?" Reed gave me a look. That suggested I had slapped him. He said, "I apologize. My family drama is such a burden." His brother betrayed him years ago, which led to our first major argument as a married couple. I didn't miss the irony. From then on, things deteriorated. Reed grew more and more suspicious. For years, Kyle and I had maintained a platonic friendship in accounting. Reed was suddenly wondering why I was texting him so much. "Just work stuff," I would clarify, irritated by the suggestion. Then, one evening when I was taking a bath, I noticed Reed browsing through my phone. "What do you do?" I insisted. Hastily, he lied and said, "Just checking the time." I realized then that Reed had not moved on from his past. He saw me as just another example of his ex-wife's infidelity. I began locking my phone because I felt unclean and somehow tarnished by someone else's behavior, not because I had anything to conceal. This simply made matters worse. If you have nothing to conceal, why lock your phone? In that quiet, composed voice that made my skin crawl, he would inquire. I found myself rationalizing girls' nights out, defending casual friendships, and defending innocent communications. Resentment began to rise inside of me like a pressure cooker as I was punished for Chelsea's transgressions. My encounter with Blake at Starbucks marked a sea change. It was a total coincidence. He was there when I went to get coffee before work. When he first saw me, he appeared ready to run, but he steeled himself and came closer. "Paige, may we have a brief conversation?" I agreed against my better judgment. Could 5 minutes do any harm? As Blake showed me texts from Chelsea, Reed's ex-wife, expressing regret for entangling him in their affair and accepting full responsibility, that 5 minutes stretched into 30. "She chased me for months," Blake said, appearing sincere in his regret. I don't claim to have been innocent, but Reed was unaware of her side. He blocked her when she tried to apologize years ago, so I shouldn't have paid attention. I should not have given a sympathetic nod. When Blake asked if we could talk more later, I definitely shouldn't have given him my number. However, I was intrigued and, if I'm being completely honest, a bit spiteful. I kept my encounter with Blake a secret from Reed after weeks of his unfounded skepticism. Why disturb the tenuous tranquility we had created? However, I did begin to perceive things differently. What if Reed was mistaken in his black and white perspective? What if he didn't see the subtleties? I started sending texts. Blake, from time, to gain perspective. It didn't feel dangerous. By learning more about my husband's past, I was assisting him. That's what I told myself anyway. Reed found Blake's texts on my phone 2 months after our wedding. "Blake, thanks for listening yesterday. It means a lot having someone who understands both sides." I was asleep on the couch when my notification appeared, but Reed didn't wake me up. He did not immediately face me. Instead, while I slept, he read through all of our conversations. Messages in which I had bemoaned his paranoia, in which Blake and I had discussed Reed's early years, and in which Blake had asked me to coffee so that we could have a more comfortable conversation. Reed was seated in the armchair opposite from me when I woke up, my phone resting on the coffee table between us, his expression entirely emotionless. The silence in his words frightened me more than if he had screamed, "How long have you been talking to my brother behind my back?" As I explained things, I stumbled. There was nothing improper, but his expression was etched with betrayal. It wasn't what it looked like. I was just trying to understand. I had to bend forward to hear him question, "Do you know what this feels like?" I attempted to explain the difference, but at that instant, I saw things from his point of view. It feels exactly like finding Chelsea's messages to Blake 3 years ago. The same excuses, the same betrayal. Even though I hadn't physically cheated, I had developed a covert friendship with the person who had caused him the most pain, divulged personal information about our marital issues, and continuously lied about it. That evening, Reed packed a tiny bag, not a grandiose departure, but a calm, deliberate gathering of necessities. "I need some time," he said. I pleaded, sobbed, and vowed to stop communicating with Blake right away, but the harm had already been done. The similarities to his former marriage were too vivid, and the scars were too fresh. He made one final turnaround before leaving. He spent 2 weeks with his friend Garrett. At our wedding, I told everyone I was afraid Blake would steal you like he stole Chelsea. I didn't realize you'd give yourself to him willingly. My calls went to voicemail for 2 weeks, my texts went unanswered, and my apology emails went unopened. I swallowed my pride and asked Diane and Warren for assistance. I was astonished by their response. Diane said, "What did you expect?" Icily. When Reed returned home, it wasn't to make amends. You encouraged him to publicly humiliate his brother, then went behind his back with that same brother. Actions have consequences, Paige. He delivered documents, forms for separation. Simply put, "I don't trust you anymore," he said. I broke down totally, pledging treatment, total transparency, and anything to mend what I had ruined. And I can't be in a marriage without trust. He nearly softened for a second. His phone then buzzed. Chelsea, of all people, texted him to see how he was doing. It was through mutual friends that she had learned about our split. I saw his reaction on his face. I noticed a change in his expression. He looked up and added, "You know, she apologized. To me. I didn't tell you 2 years ago since, at the time, nothing changed for me. However, she took full responsibility for her errors and never placed the blame elsewhere. The parallel was obvious. I was still offering excuses, while Chelsea had accepted responsibility. 6 months have passed since then. Unlike his first divorce, which was complicated by joint assets, ours was settled last week, considerably more quickly. I've heard that Reed is doing well from our common pals. Rebuilding relationships with family members who helped him is what he's doing in therapy. I never gave him the opportunity, but he's even gently getting back in touch with Chelsea, not romantically, just mending old wounds with open dialogue. Blake, meanwhile, ceased texting me after we announced our separation. As it happens, I was merely a pawn in his continuous rivalry with his brother. Warren and Diane don't even acknowledge me. The family I temporarily joined has entirely cut me off. Given that I made a mistake this time, my own parents can hardly conceal their dissatisfaction. I am the only one at fault. The worst thing? I'm still not really sure I did anything wrong. I didn't sleep with Blake, but I did talk to him behind Reed's back. I was merely attempting to comprehend. I still think that I wouldn't have needed to look for an outside viewpoint if Reed hadn't been so controlling and paranoid. It's easier than facing the truth, even if I know that's bad and that I still don't take full responsibility. With the same person who had previously harmed him, I betrayed someone who had already experienced profound betrayal. I saw Reed, Chelsea, and a couple other friends together at a restaurant last week. They were laughing, but they weren't romantic, just pleasant. I hadn't seen Reed so joyful in months. Chelsea glanced at me from the other side of the room and nodded slightly, almost pityingly. I recognized the awful irony at that same moment. While I, who believed I was superior to her, lost everything because I was unable to own up to my sins, she, the original cheater, had achieved atonement through honesty and accountability. At our wedding, Reed had remarked regarding Blake, "Some betrayals are unforgivable." I never imagined that he would say the same thing about me.